The office lights flickered as I squinted at my monitor, the only illumination left on the entire floor. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. My eyes burned from staring at the same surveillance footage for the past 3 hours, but something wasn't right with the data. I rubbed my temples and checked the time. 10:47 p.m. Another late night at Northlake Security Solutions. My coffee had gone cold beside my keyboard, but I reached for it anyway. "Come on, Eliza, you're missing something," I muttered to myself. My job as a data analyst for Seattle's integrated urban security network meant sifting through patterns no one else noticed. Traffic flow disruptions, unusual crowd gatherings, and network blind spots, all the invisible infrastructure that kept the city running smoothly. Most of my colleagues used automated algorithms and called it a day, but I preferred to verify the anomalies myself. That's when I saw it. The timestamp read 0007, just after midnight. A woman in a red coat walked through the intersection of 3rd and Pike, paused momentarily, and then vanished. One frame she was there, the next she wasn't. No alley entrance, no passing bus to obscure the view, and no camera glitch I could detect. She was simply gone. I rewound the footage, played it again at half speed, then frame by frame. The woman disappeared into thin air. "That's impossible," I whispered, leaning closer to the screen. I pulled up the system diagnostics, but no maintenance issues were reported for that camera. On a hunch, I searched the database for similar incidents, filtering for activity between 11:45 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. near transit hubs. The discovery startled me. 7 cases in the past 3 months, all showing the same impossible phenomenon. People vanishing from heavily monitored public spaces, always around midnight. I downloaded the files to my secure drive and compiled them into a report. Director Hammond would want to see this first thing tomorrow. "Technical glitches, Miss Chen, nothing more." Director Hammond barely glanced at my carefully prepared analysis before sliding it back across his polished desk. "Sir, with all due respect, I've ruled out every known camera malfunction, and the pattern, always at midnight, always near transit hubs, that can't be coincidence." I pushed the report back toward him. Hammond's blue eyes finally met mine, his expression hardening. "Our system processes millions of hours of footage. Artifacts are inevitable." His tone was dismissive, but something in his posture had changed. "I appreciate your thoroughness, but this isn't worth pursuing." "But drop it, Eliza." His voice was suddenly sharp. "These anomalies are being addressed by another department. It's not your concern." I knew that tone. The conversation was over. I gathered my materials and stood to leave. "One more thing," Hammond called as I reached the door. "This investigation isn't something you should discuss with your colleagues or continue on your own time. Understood?" I nodded stiffly and left his office, but my mind was racing. If these were just glitches, why the warning? Why the secrecy? I spent the rest of the day running standard analyses, but my thoughts kept returning to those vanishing people. Hammond's reaction only convinced me I'd stumbled onto something significant. As I packed up to leave, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. 3rd Ave and Pine, St. Midnight tonight, if you want answers. Below the message were coordinates to Pike Place Market. I knew it was stupid. Meeting an anonymous texter in downtown Seattle at midnight went against every safety protocol. I preached to my younger cousins, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. Pike Place was different at night. Without the crowds and vendors, the empty market was just shuttered stalls and empty corridors. I positioned myself where I could observe the coordinates sent to me, staying partially concealed behind a closed flower stand. My watch showed 11:58 p.m. The night air carried the lingering scent of fish and salt from the waterfront. Few people were around. A couple walking their dog, a tired-looking cleaner wheeling a trash bin, and a woman in a gray hoodie standing near the bronze pig statue. The woman checked her watch repeatedly. Something about her seemed oddly recognizable. Midnight struck. My phone flashed 12 new notifications simultaneously, system alerts from work I'd set up earlier. When I looked up from the screen, the world seemed to change. The air around the woman in the hoodie rippled like heat waves rising from hot pavement. A vertical line of light appeared beside her, widening into an opening. Through it, I glimpsed someplace else, someplace impossible, before the woman stepped through and the opening closed behind her. I gasped, stumbling forward from my hiding place. I hadn't hallucinated the surveillance footage. It was real. A hand gripped my arm with unexpected strength, pulling me back. "Don't," a man's voice warned. I spun around to face him. "Let go of me," I demanded, trying to pull away. His grip loosened, but he moved to block my path. "I'm Marcus," he said in a low, urgent voice. "You need to stop looking into this. They're watching you now." "Who's watching me? What was that thing? How did you know I'd be here?" The questions tumbled out as adrenaline coursed through me. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, scanning the nearly empty street. "Those disappearances you found, they're not glitches. They're portals, doorways that shouldn't exist. My group, we call ourselves the Passengers, we discovered them months ago. Portals? To where?" My analytical mind struggled to process what I'd witnessed. "That's complicated. Listen, Hammond isn't just dismissing your findings, he's burying them. Northlake knows about the portals, and they'll do anything to keep them secret." I started to ask another question when Marcus stiffened. Two men in black security uniforms were approaching from the direction of First Avenue. They moved with purpose, hands inside their jackets. "They found us faster than I expected," Marcus whispered. "I have to go. Trust no one at Northlake." Before I could protest, he grabbed my hand. I felt something cool press against my palm, the quick movement of a pen or marker. Then he was gone, disappearing quickly between buildings. The security guards reached me moments later, flashlights sweeping the area. "Evening, miss. You shouldn't be out here alone this late," one said, his tone professional but eyes suspicious. "Just getting some air," I replied, keeping my voice steady while sliding my marked hand into my pocket. "Heading home now." They watched as I walked to the nearest well-lit street and hailed a rideshare. Only once I was safely inside the car did I pull out my hand to examine what Marcus had left me. On my palm was a symbol I'd never seen before. A circle, bisected by 3 curved lines that almost resembled a stylized eye. I traced it with my finger, wondering what it meant and how deep this rabbit hole would go. As the city lights flashed by outside the car window, one thing was certain. I wasn't dropping this investigation, no matter what Hammond had said. The rideshare driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror as I studied my palm. "You okay back there?" he asked. "Fine," I mumbled, pulling my sleeve down. The symbol seemed to pulse faintly in the changing light of passing street lamps. By the time I reached my apartment building, I was completely exhausted. I barely managed to kick off my shoes and collapse onto my bed, my mind racing with questions about the woman, the doorway, and what Marcus had meant by, "They're coming through." Sleep came eventually, but it was restless and filled with dreams of glowing portals and shadowy figures watching me from impossible angles. I don't know exactly when I became aware of the sounds, subtle creaks, and the soft click of my front door closing, but they wove themselves into my dreams before fading. Maybe that's why I didn't immediately jump up to investigate. Maybe that's why I slept at all, unaware that someone had been moving through my home while I lay vulnerable, the marked palm tucked beneath my pillow. I jolted awake to the sound of my alarm, disoriented and gritty-eyed from a restless night. The events at Pike Place Market replayed in my mind. The woman stepping through that impossible doorway of light, Marcus's warning, the security guards. I rubbed my palm where the strange symbol had faded to a pale outline. Something felt off the moment I stepped into my living room. My laptop wasn't quite where I'd left it on the coffee table. The stack of research papers I'd been reviewing was slightly askew. The drawer of my side table stood partially open when I was certain I'd closed it. I moved to my kitchen, finding cabinet doors ajar, and my tea canister moved from its usual spot. Someone had been in my apartment while I slept. The realization made me freeze with fear. I checked my door locks and windows, all secure. Whoever had searched my place was professional enough to leave no obvious signs of forced entry. Had they found anything? What were they looking for? The ride to work was a blur of paranoia. Every traffic camera seemed to track my movement, every stranger a potential threat. By the time I reached Northlake Security Solutions, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd just been careless last night, leaving things out of place in my exhaustion. The illusion shattered when Director Hammond summoned me to his office at 9 a.m. sharp. "Good morning, Ms. Chen," he said without looking up from his computer. "I'm reassigning you effective immediately." Reassigning me? I kept my voice neutral even though alarm bells were ringing in my head. "The Palmer Heights Infrastructure Assessment, it's been flagged as urgent." He slid a folder across his desk. "Their integrated security network needs a complete overhaul and vulnerability assessment. You'll be leading the analysis team." I recognized the project, an enormous, tedious job that would keep me buried in specifications and code reviews for weeks. "What about my current surveillance analysis work?" I asked. Hammond's expression hardened fractionally. "Already reassigned. Your system access will be transferred by noon today. Sir, I've been tracking several critical anomalies that require—" "This isn't a negotiation, Eliza." His tone was final. "The Palmer Heights project is a priority for Northlake. Consider it recognition of your thoroughness." I knew what this was, a way to cut me off from the surveillance footage I'd been investigating. Hammond was burying me in busy work to keep me away from the vanishing people. "Of course, sir," I said, taking the folder. "I'll get started right away." By lunchtime, my security clearance had been modified. I could no longer access the surveillance databases where I'd found the anomalies. Even the files I'd saved to my work drive had been removed. I needed air. I grabbed my bag and headed to Occidental Park, a few blocks from the office. The small urban square was crowded with office workers enjoying the mild spring day, street musicians playing for tips, and tourists taking photos of the totem poles. I found an empty bench and pulled out my phone, studying the faded symbol on my palm. I snapped a photo and started searching. Most results were useless. Tattoo designs, gaming references, corporate logos with similar shapes. On the fourth page of search results, I found something promising, an academic article on ancient Norse symbolism. I scrolled through pages of runes and their meanings until I found a match. My heart raced as I read the description. "Threshold," I whispered. "A doorway between worlds." The symbol was a variation of an ancient rune that represented passage between realms in Norse mythology. The article mentioned similar symbols appearing in other cultures, always connected to liminal spaces and transitions. A portal. The symbol literally meant portal. I was so absorbed that I nearly missed my lunch hour ending. As I hurried back toward the Northlake building, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck made me pause. A black sedan was parked across the street, its engine running. I couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows, but something about its presence felt deliberate. I took a different route back, cutting through an alley between buildings. When I emerged on the next block, the same sedan rolled slowly past the intersection ahead. My pulse quickened. I ducked into a coffee shop, waited 5 minutes, then exited through their back door that opened into a service corridor. By the time I returned to my office, I was sweating even though the air was cool. I spent the rest of the day pretending to work on the Palmer Heights project while mentally cataloging everything I knew about the portals. Someone was watching me, someone had searched my apartment, and Hammond had effectively cut me off from the evidence. I left work precisely at 5, taking a circuitous route home. That involved 2 bus changes and walking the final 10 blocks. If anyone was following me, I made it as difficult as possible for them. My apartment building felt exposed now, its security inadequate against whoever had entered so easily the night before. I checked each room when I arrived home, finding nothing obviously disturbed. Still, I wedged a chair under the doorknob before showering and changing into comfortable clothes. I was heating leftover Thai food when 3 sharp knocks came at my door. I froze, the microwave running in the background. The knocks came again, more urgent. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and approached the door silently. The peephole revealed a distorted image of a man leaning heavily against the wall beside my door. "Eliza," Marcus's voice came through, strained and quiet. "Please." I removed the chair and opened the door a crack, knife hidden behind my back. Marcus looked terrible. His face was pale, a dark bruise blooming around his left eye. He clutched his side, blood seeping between his fingers and staining his dark shirt. "Jesus," I breathed, opening the door wider. "What happened to you?" "They found me," he said, stumbling inside as I helped him to my couch. "Hammond's security team. I got away, but not before they left their mark. You need a hospital." "No hospitals." He grimaced as he sat. "They'll be watching emergency rooms." "At least let me look at it." I set the knife down and went for my first aid kit. When I returned, he'd pulled up his shirt to reveal an ugly gash along his ribs. "It looks worse than it is," he said. "Knife wound, but shallow." I cleaned the wound in silence, applying antiseptic and butterfly bandages from my kit. He hissed through his teeth, but remained still. "That symbol I gave you," he said when I'd finished, "did you figure it out?" "Threshold, a doorway between worlds." I sat across from him. "Like the one I saw at Pike Place?" Marcus nodded, his intense green eyes looking at mine. "The portals aren't just spatial doorways, they're temporal. Windows in time that are opening randomly across Seattle." "That's impossible," I said, automatically, though after what I'd witnessed, impossible seemed relative. 3 years ago, Northlake's research division began experimenting with quantum manipulation, trying to create instantaneous transportation technology. Military applications, obviously. He moved slightly, wincing. "Something went wrong. Or right, depending on your perspective. They cracked open doorways in space-time, but couldn't control when or where they appeared. The vanishing people, they're falling through these doorways. Some are witnesses being abducted by Northlake security. Others are like us, the passengers, using the portals deliberately." He leaned forward. "Northlake has been covering it up while they try to harness the technology. Anyone who sees too much disappears." My mind raced. That's why Hammond pulled me off the surveillance footage. He doesn't want me finding more evidence. Exactly. The passengers are former Northlake scientists who realized what was happening. We've been trying to expose the truth and stabilize the portals before they cause catastrophic damage. Damage? What kind of damage? The portals are tiers in space-time. Each one weakens the fabric of reality a little more. If they continue unchecked, they could eventually collapse altogether, causing a cascading temporal event that would devastate the city. I thought of the woman disappearing into thin air, the tier in reality I'd witnessed. Why come to me? Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew what looked like an old-fashioned pocket watch. Instead of a clock face, it contained a complex arrangement of tiny gears surrounding what appeared to be a small piece of glowing blue crystal. "This is a prototype detector. It can sense when and where portals are about to form." He held it carefully, as if it might break. "I stole it during my escape from the facility." "You stole it? From Northlake?" He nodded. We need your help, Eliza, your data analysis skills. The portals follow patterns, mathematical sequences tied to energy fluctuations in the city. With your expertise in this detector, we could predict when and where they'll appear. I stared at the device. Even if I believed all this, which is a pretty big if, why would I help you? I don't know you. I don't know if any of this is real. Because you've seen it with your own eyes, Marcus said quietly. Because you know something's wrong, and because Hammond will silence you one way or another now that you've noticed the anomalies. Before I could respond, the lights in my apartment flickered. Then again, more dramatically. Marcus went rigid. They found us. Who found us? North Lake Security. He moved to the window, peering carefully through the blinds. Black SUV downstairs, 4 men. How would they know you're here? They've been tracking you since the market. I led them right to you. He looked genuinely remorseful. I'm sorry. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway outside my apartment. We have to go, Marcus said urgently, activating the device in his hand. The crystal began pulsing with blue light. There's a weak point forming here. We have less than a minute. A weak point? You mean a portal? My voice rose. In my apartment? The doorknob rattled violently. Then came the sound of a keycard sliding into the electronic lock, a master key for the building. Marcus pointed the device at my living room wall. The air began to shimmer like heat rising from hot pavement. Make your choice now, Eliza. The door burst open. 3 men in unmarked tactical gear rushed in, weapons drawn. Not police. Their equipment was too advanced, their movements too coordinated. Stop right there, one shouted. The wall behind Marcus split open like a wound, revealing a swirling doorway of blue-white light. I caught a glimpse of what looked like my own living room through the opening, but something about it was different. We have to go now, Marcus urged, extending his hand to me. One of the armed men fired. The bullet splintered my bookshelf, sending fragments of wood flying. He grabbed Marcus's hand. He pulled me toward the glowing portal as more shots rang out. We stumbled through the doorway together, the world twisting sickeningly around us. The last thing I saw before the portal closed behind us was my own apartment from an impossible angle, and the shocked faces of our pursuers as our escape route vanished before their eyes. Light and sound twisted around me as we fell through the portal. My stomach lurched with a sickening vertigo, like being on a roller coaster that suddenly dropped at an impossible angle. I clutched Marcus's hand, my knuckles white as reality itself seemed to stretch and compress. Then as suddenly as it began, it stopped. We stumbled forward, and I fell to my knees on a hardwood floor. My hardwood floor. I blinked, disoriented. We were still in my apartment. It didn't work, I gasped. They'll be right behind us. But Marcus shook his head. No, it worked. Look closer. I pushed myself up and took in my surroundings. At first glance, everything seemed the same, but then the differences registered. My coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter. I'd left it in the sink. The light outside my windows was different too, golden afternoon sun instead of evening darkness. A plant I kept on my windowsill had been knocked over, soil spilled across the sill. I don't understand. Marcus moved cautiously to the window, peering through the blinds. We moved through time, not just space. It's approximately 12 hours later, same location, different moment. That's impossible, I said automatically, though I was quickly learning that impossible had become a meaningless concept. Look, Marcus said, pulling back the blinds. I joined him at the window. Below, 2 police cruisers were parked outside my building, their lights silently flashing. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered behind yellow police tape. They're investigating your disappearance, Marcus explained. Right now, this apartment is a crime scene. The officers were probably called away for a briefing, but they'll be back soon. I felt a chill run down my spine. My disappearance, but I'm right here. Not according to this timeline. To them, you vanished after armed intruders broke into your apartment. There were gunshots, signs of struggle. Your neighbors would have called it in. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to process the implications. So what now? We can't stay here. Marcus checked the portal device, which had stopped glowing. The portable generator is depleted. According to these readings, we have approximately 8 hours before it can accumulate enough charge to create another doorway. 8 hours as fugitives, I muttered. Where do we go? The passengers have a hideout at an abandoned ferry terminal in Elliott Bay. Dr. Torres will be there. She can help us make sense of the data we've gathered. I grabbed my laptop bag from where it had fallen during our escape. We need to move quickly. If this is a crime scene, the police could return any minute. We slipped out through the building service entrance, avoiding the officers at the front. According to Marcus's watch, it was just after 4 p.m., 12 hours after we jumped through the portal. We should avoid main streets, Marcus said, guiding me down an alley. North Lake will have your face everywhere by now. I pulled my hood up, suddenly aware of how exposed we were. How far is this ferry terminal? About 4 miles. We'll have to take a roundabout route and avoid security cameras when possible. We moved carefully through the city, sticking to side streets and alleyways. Marcus seemed to know exactly which corners had cameras and which didn't, knowledge that showed careful planning and surveillance. As we crossed through a small urban park, I froze. Across the street, my own face stared back at me from a digital billboard. Below my photo, bold red letters spelled out, "Person of Interest." "They're framing me," I whispered, stunned by the surreal experience of seeing myself labeled this way. Marcus pulled me along. "Hammond is controlling the narrative. By now, they've probably connected you to classified data breaches or something worse. It's how they discredit witnesses. We couldn't risk public transportation with my face being broadcast. Even traveling on foot felt dangerous, my face now recognizable to any civic-minded citizen who might spot us. The city that had been my home for years suddenly felt hostile, filled with potential threats. "We need to verify the data I collected," I said as we passed through Denny Triangle. "If what you're saying about these portals is true, there should be patterns we can analyze." Marcus nodded. "The Capitol Hill Library isn't far from here. We could use their computers and stay out of sight for a bit while we work." The library was a modern building with large windows and open spaces, not ideal for hiding, but better than standing exposed on the streets. We slipped in, keeping our heads down, and found a quiet corner with 2 computer terminals partially obscured by bookshelves. I plugged in my external drive and began sifting through the surveillance data I'd managed to download before Hammond cut my access. Marcus kept watch, his eyes constantly checking the library entrance. "Look at this," I said after 20 minutes of work. "The portal appearances aren't random. There's a mathematical pattern to when and where they appear." Marcus leaned closer to see my screen. "What kind of pattern?" "It correlates with power grid fluctuations. Every time a portal opens, there's a corresponding surge in the electrical grid nearest to that location. The larger the surge, the longer the portal remains open." My analyst's brain was fully engaged now, finding connections in the data. "If we overlay the power grid map with the portal appearances," I pulled up Seattle's electrical infrastructure blueprint and mapped the anomalies. "There, see? The portals are appearing along junction points in the grid where power density is highest. That matches our observations," Marcus said, "but we've never been able to predict them accurately. With enough data points, we could," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "We'd need to factor in time of day, power consumption patterns, and grid load distribution, but it's doable." As I worked, Marcus grew quiet. I glanced up to find him watching me with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" He hesitated. "There's something I should tell you about how I got involved in all this." I paused my analysis, sensing the significance of what was coming. "I was a quantum physicist at North Lake. he said quietly. Part of the original research team that developed the portal technology. We thought we were creating a revolutionary transportation system, instantaneous travel between points in space. You helped create the portals? I couldn't hide my surprise. He nodded. The initial experiments were promising. Small objects could be transported across our lab. But then we discovered something unexpected: temporal displacement. The objects weren't just moving through space, but time as well, sometimes seconds, sometimes hours. That's when Hammond stepped in. Hammond and the board saw the military applications immediately. They pushed us to scale up the experiments, even though we warned them about instability. 3 of my colleagues disappeared during a test. The official report said they died in a lab accident, but I knew better. They fell through time. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, the guilt of someone who had created something that caused harm. That's when I left and found others who understood the danger. We formed the passengers to track the portals and try to shut down what we'd started. I was about to respond when Marcus suddenly stiffened, his eyes fixed on something behind me near the library entrance. I turned slightly to see what had alarmed him. A security guard in a recognizable dark blue uniform was speaking with the librarian at the front desk. Not a library guard. This was a Northlake security officer, the same one who often worked the desk in my office building. "He's seen the alert about you," Marcus whispered. "We need to move. Now." Without drawing attention, we shut down the computer and gathered our things. The guard hadn't spotted us yet, but he was methodically searching the library floor. "Service exit through the staff area," I said, nodding toward a door marked "Employees Only" near the reference section. We casually made our way there, moving between bookshelves to stay out of the guard's line of sight. Just as we reached the door, I heard him call out, "Hey, stop right there!" Marcus pushed the door open and we broke into a run, dashing through a startled employee's workspace and out through a loading dock at the back of the building. The shouts behind us confirmed we'd been spotted. We sprinted down an alley, turned onto a crowded street, then ducked into a small market, weaving through shoppers before exiting through a side door. Marcus guided our escape with practiced efficiency, which suggested he'd planned routes like this before. By the time darkness fell, we'd lost any pursuers and made our way to the waterfront. The abandoned ferry terminal stood ahead, a hulking structure of concrete and metal that had been decommissioned years ago when the newer terminal was built, half a mile away. "The entrance is hidden," Marcus explained as we approached cautiously. "Security cameras in this area have been looped to show empty footage." He led me to what appeared to be a maintenance door, partially obscured by overgrowth and tagged with graffiti. Marcus tapped out a pattern on the rusted metal, not random, I realized, but a code. 3 long, 2 short, 3 long. The door opened to reveal a narrow passage illuminated by strings of bare bulbs. A woman with a stern expression and a pistol at her hip gestured us inside. "You're late," she said to Marcus. Torres was getting worried. "We had complications," Marcus replied. "This is Eliza Chen, the analyst I told you about." The woman eyed me skeptically but nodded. "Follow me. Everyone's waiting." The passage opened into what must have once been the terminal's main mechanical room. Now it had been transformed into a makeshift command center. Tables covered with computers, equipment, and maps filled the space. About a dozen people moved around, some working at stations, others gathered around a central table where a woman was gesturing at what looked like architectural plans. "Dr. Torres," Marcus called out. "We made it." The woman at the center table looked up. Dr. Vivian Torres was probably in her late 40s, with streaks of gray in her black hair and the focused eyes of someone who carried immense responsibility. She moved with purpose as she approached us. "Ms. Chen," she said, extending her hand. "I'm glad you're here, though I wish it were under better circumstances." I shook her hand, noting her firm grip. "I think I'm still processing everything that's happened in the last 24 hours. Understandable. You've been thrown into the deep end. She led us to the central table. Marcus tells me you're an exceptional analyst. We could use your perspective. As I approached the table, I saw what they had been studying. Detailed blueprints of the Northlake Security Solutions building with particular focus on an underground level I hadn't known existed. The passengers, Torres explained, gesturing to the people around us, are former Northlake scientists, engineers, and security personnel who learned the truth and chose to act. We've been monitoring the portal phenomena for months, trying to understand them. They're growing worse, said a man with thick glasses who was analyzing data on a nearby monitor. The temporal instability is increasing with each new appearance. Torres nodded grimly. That's what I need to explain to you, Ms. Chen. These portals aren't just doorways in space-time. They're symptoms of a dangerous degradation in the fabric of reality itself. She led me to a wall covered with photographs, news clippings, and scientific readings. We've documented temporal anomalies across the city, objects appearing from nowhere, duplicating or aging decades in seconds, people experiencing lost time or seeing events before they happen. The worst was last month. An entire coffee shop on First Avenue experienced a temporal loop. The same 3 minutes repeated for nearly an hour before stabilizing. I studied the evidence, my analytical mind trying to process the implications. And this is happening because of Northlake's experiments? Yes, they've been running a quantum reactor beneath the main facility, the source of the instability. Each new portal tears at the fabric of space-time a little more. If it continues, the damage could become irreversible. Marcus spread out the data I'd been analyzing at the library. Eliza discovered a pattern to the portal appearances. They follow the city's electrical grid. Torres leaned forward, suddenly intensely interested. Show me. I walked her through my findings, explaining how the portals appeared at junction points in the power grid during peak load times. The more energy flowing through the system, the more likely a portal would appear. This is exactly what we needed, Torres said when I finished. With this algorithm, we can predict portal formations with much greater accuracy. The team gathered around as I continued explaining, pointing out patterns in the data that showed increasing frequency and duration of portal events. The reactor at Northlake is the source, Torres said after we had reviewed everything. It's generating quantum instabilities that manifest as portals throughout the city's power infrastructure. We need to shut it down before the temporal fractures become too severe to repair. How do we do that? I asked. Northlake has state-of-the-art security and Hammond knows we're coming. Torres smiled for the first time, a determined expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. We use their own technology against them. Based on your data, we can calculate when and where the next major portal will appear. If it happens close enough to Northlake, we could use it to bypass their security entirely, Marcus finished. Exactly. A direct insertion into the facility through a naturally occurring portal. As the team began planning the infiltration, I studied the building schematics, identifying security systems and possible entry points. Even with the surreal circumstances, this kind of analytical problem-solving felt familiar. A stabilizing force in a world that had become increasingly unstable. By midnight, we had formulated a plan. Using my algorithm and the portal device Marcus had stolen, we calculated that a significant portal would appear near Queen Anne Hill in approximately 60 hours, close enough to Northlake to attempt infiltration. Get some rest, Torres advised as the planning session broke up. We have a lot of preparation to do tomorrow. Marcus showed me to a small room that had once been an office, now furnished with a cot and some basic amenities. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I felt overwhelmed by all the events of the past day. How did you do it? I asked as Marcus turned to leave. How did you adjust to learning that reality isn't what you thought it was? He paused in the doorway, considering the question. I never did, not really. You just learn to navigate the new normal, to find solid ground where you can. He offered a slight smile. Try to sleep. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to save the world. After he left, I lay back on the cot, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. Portals in space-time, temporal anomalies, a secret group of scientists fighting against the company that had employed me for years. It all seemed impossible, and yet I had seen it with my own eyes. Outside my small room, I could hear the passengers still working, typing on keyboards, discussing theories, preparing for whatever came next. These people had given up their careers, their identities, perhaps even their futures to stop what they had helped create. As exhaustion finally pulled me toward sleep, one thought remained clear: there was no going back to my old life. Whatever happened next, I was now part of something much bigger than I had ever imagined. Morning light filtered through a narrow window near the ceiling of my small room, casting a thin beam across the concrete floor. My body ached from the unfamiliar cot, a reminder that everything had changed. I sat up and ran my fingers through my tangled hair, trying to gather my thought and accept my new reality. Fugitive, portal witness, and now conspirator with a group of renegade scientists. The corridor outside buzzed with activity. When I emerged from my room, I found the passengers already at work. Some hunched over computers, others assembling equipment that looked like modified versions of Marcus's portal device. Dr. Torres spotted me and waved me over to a workstation. "Coffee's on the counter if you need it," she said, gesturing to a battered pot. "We've compiled all our portal data, but we need your analytical skills to refine the prediction model." I poured myself a cup of the strong black coffee. "I'll need access to the city's power grid metrics. My initial analysis shows a direct correlation between electrical load distribution and portal formation." "Already working on it," said a voice behind me. Marcus appeared with a laptop in hand. "I've got a back door into Seattle City Light's monitoring system." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Is that new?" "Set it up last night while Eliza was sleeping," he replied, placing the laptop on the table. "Thought we might need it." I gave him a small smile of thanks, appreciating his foresight, and settled in to work. The data was overwhelming. Hundreds of power fluctuation reports, substation loads, grid junction points, all needing to be correlated with the passengers' documented portal appearances. The morning stretched into afternoon as I built my algorithm, cross-referencing portal sightings with power surges. Marcus worked beside me, explaining the quantum principles behind the portals as I identified patterns in the data. "The portals aren't random," I said finally, looking up from my screen. "They follow the path of least resistance through Seattle's electrical infrastructure." Torres leaned over my shoulder, studying the map I'd created. "Can you predict the next one?" "With enough variables, yes." I pulled up a simulation. If the pattern holds, we should see a significant portal formation near Queen Anne Hill in approximately 68 hours. That's close enough to North Lake for our purposes. A ripple of excitement moved through the room as word spread. For the first time since joining the passengers, I felt a sense of purpose, of making a tangible contribution. "Good work," Marcus said quietly when the others had moved away to begin planning the infiltration. The corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "I knew you were the right person for this." "How could you know that?" I asked, curious about his confidence in me. "You barely knew me when you approached me at Pike Place." He hesitated. "Your reputation at Northlake, the way you questioned patterns others ignored. Not many analysts would have noticed those disappearances in the surveillance footage." I studied him, searching for any hint of deception. Even after everything we'd been through, I still found myself holding back, unwilling to fully trust. "What is it?" he asked, noticing my scrutiny. "Nothing," I said, turning back to my laptop. "Just wondering how much of what you've told me is actually true." He didn't respond immediately, and when I glanced up, his expression was unreadable. Fair enough, he said finally. Trust has to be earned. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. I refined my algorithm while the passengers prepared equipment and mapped out entry points to the North Lake facility. By evening, exhaustion had set in and Torres ordered everyone to rest. Tomorrow we test the predictions and finalize the plan, she announced. Get some sleep. I returned to my small room but found myself too wired to sleep. After an hour of tossing on the cot, I gave up and wandered back into the main area. A single light illuminated one corner where Marcus sat alone, examining what looked like blueprints. Can't sleep either? I asked, approaching his table. He looked up, surprised. Too much on my mind. You? Same. I gestured to the chair across from him. Mind if I join you? Please. I sat down, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. What were you like before all this? I asked suddenly. Before North Lake and portals and running for your life? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He set down the blueprints and leaned back in his chair. Ordinary, he said after a moment. Ambitious physicist with big dreams and a small apartment. I spent weekends hiking in the Olympics, had a cat named Schrödinger. A sad smile crossed his face. Predictable, I know. What happened to the cat? My neighbor took him when I disappeared. He stared into the middle distance. Sometimes I wonder if this is all worth it. The running, the hiding. If we fail, everything I gave up was for nothing. The vulnerability in his voice surprised me. It was easy to forget that every member of the passengers had abandoned normal lives to fight an invisible war most people didn't even know existed. Why did you leave North Lake? I asked. You could have stayed, kept your position, your life. His green eyes sharpened, the distant look vanishing. Because I saw what was coming through, what Hammond welcomed with open arms. A muscle tightened in his jaw. Some prices are too high, even for groundbreaking science. Before I could ask what he meant, Torres appeared at the doorway. Marcus, I need you to check the power relay we installed on Queen Anne. Her eyes moved between us. Sorry to interrupt. No problem, he said, gathering the blueprints. We were just talking. After he left, Torres lingered, watching me with an evaluative look. You're adjusting well, she observed. I shrugged. Not sure I have much choice. There's always a choice. She sat in the chair Marcus had vacated. How much has he told you about what we're really up against? The portals, the reactor, Hammond's cover-up. I looked at her questioningly. Is there more? Torres's expression hardened. Come with me. There's something you should see. She led me to a small room I hadn't noticed before, secured with both an electronic keypad and a physical lock. Inside was a single computer terminal, isolated from any network. What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room, Torres said as she typed in a complex password. Not everyone here knows the full truth. Some couldn't handle it. My pulse quickened. What truth? About what came through during the first successful portal experiment. She pulled up a video file dated 3 years earlier. This was captured by North Lake's security system. The grainy footage showed a laboratory setting with a circular metal frame at its center. A team of scientists in white coats monitored equipment while a younger Hammond observed from behind a glass partition. The timestamp in the corner advanced until it reached 03:17:42, when the air within the metal frame began to ripple. The first stable portal, Torres narrated quietly. We thought we'd finally succeeded in creating controlled quantum transportation. On screen, the rippling intensified until a tear formed in the air itself, similar to what I'd witnessed at Pike Place, but smaller, more contained. The scientists began celebrating, shaking hands and patting backs. Then something changed. The portal's edges darkened, and the scientists and celebrations turned to concern. They rushed to their instruments as the portal pulsed with an unnatural light. We lost control, Torres said, that the quantum field expanded beyond our calculations. I watched in growing horror as the portal widened suddenly and something emerged, a shadowy, moving shape that seemed to bend the light around it. The figure moved with unsettling fluidity, its proportions almost human but somehow wrong. Ediptuanlesigiska imedalfermintan. They kiddeseturn. Tucker backed and tied and back away in panic. Hammond, however, stepped forward. "Watch him," Torres instructed, pointing to the screen. Instead of fleeing like the others, Hammond approached the entity. The security camera couldn't clearly capture the being's features. They seemed to constantly move and blur. But I could see Hammond clearly. His expression changed from shock to something else entirely. A look of recognition, then awe. The entity reached out with what might have been a hand, touching Hammond's forehead. Hammond's body went rigid, then relaxed. When he turned back to the scientists, his face held a strange, new purpose. The entity communicated with him somehow, Torres explained. After this, Hammond shut down all official documentation of what happened. The project was officially terminated, but secretly accelerated under his direct supervision. She pulled up another file, security footage from 6 months ago showing Hammond in his office after hours. He wasn't alone. 3 figures stood before him, their outlines difficult to focus on. Whenever I tried to look directly at them, their features seemed to change and distort. "They're called the Architects," Torres said quietly. At least that's what Hammond calls them in his private communications. They've been meeting regularly since the incident. "What do they want?" I whispered, unable to look away from the disturbing footage. "Access to our world. The portal technology was their design, not ours. Hammond and his team merely implemented it, thinking it was their own breakthrough." Torres's voice was tight with controlled anger. "They've been influencing Northlake from the beginning, guiding the research toward their goals." She closed the video files and turned to face me directly. "That's why we can't just expose Northlake or have the government shut them down. The Architects have infiltrated too deeply. We need to destroy the portal technology completely before they can fully establish themselves here." My mind raced to process this new information. "Does Marcus know about this?" "Yes, he was there for the first emergence. That's why he left Northlake." She studied my face closely. "I'm showing you this because you need to understand the stakes. When we infiltrate that facility, we're not just stopping a dangerous experiment. We're preventing something far worse." I nodded, a chill running through me as I recalled the unnatural way the entities moved in the footage. "I understand." "Good." Torres stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those strange figures standing in Hammond's office, their outlines refusing to resolve into anything recognizable. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. My algorithm successfully predicted 3 minor portal formations across the city, confirming the pattern. The passengers divided into teams, each with specific roles for the infiltration. I worked with Marcus to map our route through the Northlake facility, using his knowledge of the building's layout and security systems. Even with my lingering doubts, I found myself drawing closer to Marcus as we prepared for the mission. His focus, his determination to stop Hammond seemed genuine. Yet I couldn't shake the memory of those entities in Torres's footage, or the nagging question of why Marcus had sought me out specifically. On the evening before the mission, the passengers gathered for a final briefing. Torres stood at the center of the room, outlining each team's objectives. "Team 1 will create a diversion at the main entrance," she explained, indicating a group of 4 passengers. "Team 2 will disable the external power grid serving the building, forcing them to switch to internal generators." Another 4 passengers nodded grimly. "And Team 3, Marcus and Eliza, will enter through the portal and proceed directly to the reactor chamber." Torres looked at us steadily. Your objective is to reach the control room and initiate the shutdown sequence. The rest of us will keep their security forces occupied. As the meeting concluded, a tense anticipation filled the room. People checked equipment, exchanged quiet words of encouragement, prepared themselves for what might be their last mission. Marcus found me sitting alone, staring at the portal device we would use tomorrow night. "Nervous?" he asked, sitting beside me. "Terrified," I admitted. "Yesterday I was an analyst in a comfortable office job. Now I'm about to break into a secret facility to stop interdimensional beings from invading Earth." I laughed weakly. Not exactly a career path I planned for. He placed his hand over mine briefly. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling it remarkably well." "Do you think we'll succeed?" His expression grew serious. "I think we have to try, regardless of the odds." He hesitated. "Eliza, if something happens to me tomorrow—" "Don't," I interrupted. "No deathbed confessions or dramatic last requests. We're both making it out." A strange look crossed his face, half amusement, half something I couldn't identify. "All right," he said, "no confessions." Later that night, I tried to sleep but found myself staring at the ceiling, mind racing. Around midnight, I heard a soft knock at my door. "It's Torres," came the quiet voice. I opened the door to find her holding a small case. "What is it?" "Insurance," she said, entering and closing the door behind her. She opened the case to reveal a small device resembling a thumb drive. "This contains all the evidence we've gathered about the architects and Hammond's collaboration with them. If we fail tomorrow, if something happens to us, this needs to reach the right people." She pressed it into my hand. "Keep it with you. If things go wrong, prioritize getting this out over completing the mission." I closed my fingers around the device. Why me? Why not Marcus? Torres's expression remained neutral. "Because I need to be certain." She didn't elaborate further, but something in her tone made me wonder if she shared my lingering doubts about Marcus. "I understand," I said, tucking the device into an inner pocket of my jacket. "Get some sleep if you can," Torres said, moving toward the door. "Tomorrow, everything changes." The following day passed with agonizing slowness. Final preparations were made, equipment checked and rechecked. By evening, a quiet determination had settled over the passengers as everyone moved to their assigned positions. Marcus and I traveled separately from the others, making our way to a condemned building near Queen Anne Hill where my algorithm predicted the portal would form. We arrived an hour before midnight, setting up our equipment in the abandoned structure. "The portal should form there," I said, pointing to a spot where several power conduits ran beneath the building. "Power grid readings show increasing fluctuations already." Marcus nodded, checking the modified portal device. "This will help stabilize it long enough for us to pass through. Once we're inside North Lake, we'll have approximately 20 minutes to reach the reactor chamber before the diversion teams engage." We fell silent as midnight approached. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythms, oblivious to what was about to unfold. Lights from downtown Seattle gleamed in the distance, beautiful and unsuspecting. "Why did you really choose me?" I asked suddenly. "Out of all the people who might have noticed those anomalies, why did you contact me?" Marcus didn't look up from the device he was calibrating. "Your analysis skills, like I said. There must be dozens of analysts with similar skills. Why me specifically?" He finally looked at me. "Maybe I saw something in you that reminded me of myself, the need to understand even when understanding brings pain." Before I could respond, the device in his hands began to glow. "It's starting," he said, all personal matters forgotten. "Get ready." The air before us shimmered, reality bending as if viewed through water. The portal device pulsed with blue light, stabilizing the forming tear. Gradually, an opening appeared, a doorway of swirling energy leading into darkness. "Now," Marcus said, extending his hand to me. "Remember, straight to the reactor chamber. No detours, no matter what we see." I took his hand, and together we stepped into the portal. The world twisted around us, a kaleidoscopic tunnel of light and sound. My stomach lurched as reality itself seemed to fold. Then abruptly, solid ground materialized beneath my feet. We emerged in a dimly lit corridor with smooth white walls. Emergency lights pulsed softly along the floor, illuminating what appeared to be a laboratory setting. The portal closed behind us with a soft whoosh of air. "Maintenance level," Marcus whispered, orienting himself. 2 floors beneath the main facility." He reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like a key card. "My old security credentials. They might still work if Hammond hasn't purged me from the system." We moved cautiously through the corridor, encountering no one. The facility seemed unusually quiet for a place housing world-changing research. "Where is everyone?" I whispered as we approached an elevator. "Night shift is minimal," Marcus explained. "Most of the scientific staff work days." He swiped his card at the elevator panel. After a tense moment, the light turned green. "Still active. Hammond's overconfidence works in our favor." The elevator carried us upward to what Marcus identified as the research level. As the doors opened, we pressed ourselves against the walls, but the corridor beyond was empty. "The reactor chamber is this way," Marcus said, leading me through a maze of hallways. The facility was larger than I'd imagined, with numerous laboratories branching off the main corridor. Through one glass partition, I glimpsed what looked like portal frames in various stages of construction. Another lab contained computer banks running complex simulations of what appeared to be dimensional fracture patterns. "They're scaling up," I whispered. "These aren't just experiments anymore." Marcus nodded grimly. "Hammond is preparing for something big. The power requirements for these designs would be enormous." We turned a corner and stopped short. Ahead lay a massive set of reinforced doors marked "Quantum Reactor Authorized Personnel Only." Through small windows in the doors, I could see movement inside, technicians in white lab coats moving around a central structure. Marcus pulled me into an adjacent observation room. Through a one-way glass window, we had a clear view of the reactor chamber. What I saw took my breath away. A massive portal framework dominated the center of the room, easily 30 feet in diameter. Unlike the portable device Marcus carried, this was a permanent installation, connected to power conduits that pulsed with energy. Hammond stood on a raised platform, directing technicians as they made adjustments to the control systems. But what caught my attention, what made my blood run cold, was what lay beyond the partially activated portal. Through the shimmering opening, I could see a landscape unlike anything on Earth. Rust-colored soil, stretching toward a distant ridge of crystalline formations beneath a purple-hued sky where 2 moons hung motionless. "That's not just another location," I whispered. "That's another world entirely." "The architect's home dimension," Marcus confirmed, his voice tight. "Hammond is building them a permanent doorway." I stared at the alien landscape, trying to process what I was seeing. "How do we stop it?" "The control room." Marcus pointed to a glass-enclosed space at the far end of the chamber. "From there, we can initiate an emergency shutdown of the reactor. Without power, the portal will collapse." We backtracked to a service corridor that would lead us around to the control room entrance. As we moved, the facility's lights suddenly dimmed, then brightened again. "That's our diversion team," Marcus said. "They've hit the external power grid. Northlake is switching to internal generators." We quickened our pace, knowing our window of opportunity was narrowing. The service corridor wound around the exterior of the reactor chamber, leading to a small doorway that would put us directly behind the control room. "Almost there," Marcus said as we approached the final turn. The silence was shattered by a deafening alarm. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the corridor as a computerized voice announced, Security breach detected, initiating facility lockdown. On a monitor mounted on the wall nearby, I saw Hammond looking up in alarm. He barked orders at the security personnel as technicians scrambled to secure the portal equipment. Then Hammond turned toward a different monitor, and his expression changed from concern to cold satisfaction. He'd seen us on the security cameras. "Run!" Marcus shouted, pulling me toward the control room door. We sprinted down the corridor as heavy security doors began descending from the ceiling, designed to compartmentalize the facility during an emergency. We ducked under one door just before it sealed shut. The next door was already halfway down. Marcus slid beneath it, then reached back for me. I dived forward, but as I cleared the threshold, the door slammed down on my ankle. I cried out in pain, trying to pull free. Marcus grabbed my arms, pulling as I twisted to free my leg. With a final heave, I slipped through, the door sealing shut behind me with an ominous thud. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked, helping me to my feet. I tested my weight on the ankle. It hurt, but wasn't broken. "I'll manage." We continued forward, but as we reached the final corridor leading to the control room, another security door slammed down between us. Marcus was on one side, I on the other. "Eliza," his voice was muffled through the thick metal. "I'm okay," I called back. "Is there another way around?" "There's a maintenance shaft that runs parallel to this corridor. I'll try to reach you that way. Get to the control room if you can." Through the small window in the security door, I watched him disappear back the way we'd come. I was alone now, cut off from my guide in the heart of North Lake's secret facility. I turned to assess my options. The corridor ahead led to a junction. Left would take me toward the control room, while right led deeper into the facility. As I weighed my choices, I heard footsteps approaching from the right. With no time to hesitate, I ducked into an unlocked room on my left. It appeared to be some kind of server room, filled with racks of humming equipment. The door had no lock, so I pressed myself against the wall beside it, hoping whoever was coming would pass by. The footsteps slowed as they approached, then stopped outside my hiding place. The door handle turned, the door swung open, and I held my breath, pressing myself flat against the wall. A security guard stepped halfway into the server beeper B. "Umitsan, Fuan de Flavhardi, and Nakerbi." Shamwish light around in a cursory sweep, then backed out. The door clicked shut. I exhaled slowly. I waited 10 seconds, then crept to the door and pressed my ear against it. The footsteps continued down the corridor, growing fainter. When I couldn't hear them anymore, I eased the door open a crack and peered out. The hallway was empty. My ankle throbbed as I limped to the junction where the corridor split. Marcus had told me to get to the control room, but I had no idea how to reach it now that we'd been separated. I needed a map. On the wall near the junction hung a framed emergency evacuation plan. I studied it quickly, memorizing the layout of the east wing where I was trapped. The control room was on the other side of the reactor chamber, but there appeared to be a maintenance corridor that would take me around to a secondary entrance. I followed the route indicated on the map, limping as quietly as possible. The facility's alarms had stopped, which was somehow more unnerving than their blaring. The silence felt tense. As I rounded a corner, voices drifted from a partially open door. I froze, then edged closer to listen. "The architects are becoming impatient," a woman's voice said. "Hammond promised them access by tomorrow. The quantum equations they provided are beyond anything we could have developed on our own," a man replied. "But I'm still not convinced their intentions are benevolent." "That's not our concern," the woman snapped. "Our job is to establish the gateway as specified. Besides, the technology exchange alone will advance human science by centuries." I backed away, processing what I'd heard. The architects had provided the quantum technology to Northlake. This wasn't just Hammond's experiment, it was a transaction. Technology in exchange for passage to Earth. I continued down the corridor until I reached a heavy door marked Server Farm Alpha Restricted Access. On a hunch, I tried Marcus's security card. The light turned green and the door clicked open. Inside, rows of server racks buzzed with activity. This had to be where Northlake stored its research data. If I could access their files, maybe I could find something to help us stop whatever Hammond was planning. I sat at a terminal and swiped the card again. The login screen disappeared, replaced by a file directory. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for anything related to the portals or the architects. A folder labeled Project Threshold caught my attention. Inside were hundreds of files documenting the portal experiments chronologically. I skimmed through recent entries, my stomach clenching as I realized the truth. Northlake hadn't just been studying the portals, they'd been causing them. The random appearances across Seattle were controlled tests monitored via the very surveillance system I'd been analyzing. Each portal was a calibration, preparing for something bigger. Tomorrow's date was highlighted in the project timeline, marked Permanent Gateway Initialization. Hammond was planning to open a stable, permanent portal the next day. I inserted a small drive from my pocket and began copying files. As I waited, I opened another folder labeled Asset Management. It contained personnel files, including one for Marcus. My cursor hovered over his file for a moment before I clicked. His image appeared on screen alongside a status report dated just last week. My blood ran cold as I read, Asset continues to provide valuable intelligence on resistance group activities. Monitoring of his communications with Dr. Torres shows planned incursion attempt targeting main facility. Security protocols adjusted accordingly. Asset to be extracted before final sequence initiation. Asset. They were tracking him. But that meant the file continued with a security footage still image that knocked the air from my lungs. It showed Marcus meeting with Hammond in an office, shaking hands. The timestamp was from just 2 weeks ago. Marcus had betrayed the passengers, betrayed me. I didn't have time to process this revelation. The file transfer completed with a soft chime, and I pocketed the drive. I needed to reach the reactor chamber and warn Torres if she was even here. I followed the maintenance quarters indicated on the emergency map, ducking into alcoves whenever I heard footsteps. My mind raced with questions about Marcus. Had everything been a lie? The connection I thought we'd formed, his apparent dedication to stopping Hammond, was it all part of his cover? The corridor ended at a service door. According to the map, it should open into the lower level of the reactor chamber. I pressed my ear against it but heard nothing. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and slipped through. I emerged onto a narrow catwalk that circled the chamber about 15 feet above the main floor. From this vantage point, I could see the entire operation. The massive portal framework dominated the center of the room, its inner circle shimmering with energy, though not yet fully activated. Technicians moved around it, making adjustments to equipment that fed power into the structure. Hammond was nowhere in sight. Neither was Marcus. I crouched low, making my way around the catwalk toward what looked like the control room entrance. A hand suddenly gripped my shoulder, and I barely stopped myself from crying out. "Eliza," Dr. Torres whispered, pulling me into the shadows of a support column. "Where's Marcus?" "We got separated," I said, relief washing over me at seeing a friendly face. "But Torres, I found something. Marcus has been working with Hammond. I saw security footage of them together 2 weeks ago. Northlake's been tracking him, using him to monitor the passengers." Torres's expression didn't change. "I know," she said quietly. "You know? Then why?" "Because Marcus has been working as a double agent," she explained. "He's been feeding Hammond carefully crafted information while gathering evidence of what's really happening here." I stared at her in disbelief. "But the file said he was an asset. That's what Hammond believes. Marcus convinced him he'd infiltrated our group to report back to Northlake. It was the only way to get close enough to access the facility's highest security levels." Torres looked grim. "Our sabotage plan," was always meant as a diversion. The real mission was to obtain irrefutable proof of the architect's existence and force government intervention. I felt like I was getting whiplash from the constant reversals. So, Marcus is actually on our side? He's not betraying us? Torres's eyes flicked toward the portal frame. That depends on your definition of our side. The situation is more complicated than I initially told you. Before she could elaborate, the main doors to the chamber slid open. Hammond strode in, flanked by security guards. Between them, his hands bound behind his back, was Marcus. Torres pulled me deeper into the shadows as Hammond marched Marcus down to the main floor. "The final calibration sequence needs your authorization," one of the technicians called to Hammond. "Proceed," Hammond ordered. He turned to Marcus with a cold smile. "You didn't really think I believed your little double agent routine, did you? I've been tracking your movements since you left Northlake. Every meeting with Torres, every communication with your resistance friends." Marcus said nothing, his face impassive. "Your diversion teams have been captured," Hammond continued. "Your plan to stop us has failed, but I want you to witness the culmination of what you helped start." He gestured to the portal frame. "Tomorrow, history changes." "You don't understand what you're doing," Marcus said, his voice carrying up to where we hid. "You don't know what will come through." "On the contrary," Hammond replied. "I understand perfectly. The architects have shown me the future." On the main control panel, indicators switched from amber to green. A low buzz built in the chamber, the sound resonating in my chest. The shimmer within the portal frame intensified. "The power levels are unstable," a technician warned. "We're not scheduled to activate for another 12 hours. "The timeline has accelerated," Hammond said. "Initialize the sequence now." Torres gripped my arm. "They're opening it early. We need to get down there." She pulled a small device from her pocket. "This is an EMP transmitter. If we can get close enough to the control panel, we can trigger it and shut down the portal." We hurried along the catwalk to a ladder that descended to the main floor. The chamber was now so focused on the portal activation that no one noticed as we slipped down and took cover behind a bank of equipment. The buzz grew louder, the portal's shimmer brightening to a painful intensity. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, a hole appeared in the center of the frame. Beyond it, I could see a landscape unlike anything on Earth, crystalline structures rising from rust-colored soil under an alien sky. "My God," I whispered. "It's too late," Torres muttered. "They're already coming through." As we watched, the opening widened. Something moved on the other side, shapes approaching the tear between worlds. Hammond laughed, a sound of triumph and madness. "At last!" The shapes resolved into figures as they neared the portal. They were vaguely humanoid, but wrong somehow. Proportions slightly off, movements too fluid. Their skin seemed to move with patterns of light beneath the surface. "The architects," Torres breathed. One of the figures stepped through the portal, its shape seeming to adjust as it entered our reality. The air around it shimmered and light bent strangely in its presence. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Some technicians backed away in fear while others moved forward in fascination. Hammond approached the entity with reverence, extending his hand in greeting. In the confusion, Marcus made his move. He slammed his shoulder into the guard holding him, breaking free. Before anyone could react, he sprinted toward the control panel. "He's going to shut it down," I said, starting forward. Torres grabbed my arm, holding me back. "Wait." Marcus reached the panel, his fingers flying over the controls, but instead of shutting down the portal, he began adjusting settings, reconfiguring the parameters. "What is he doing?" I asked, stunned. "Why isn't he closing it?" The portal stabilized, its edges no longer fluctuating, but holding steady. More figures began to move through, each moving and adjusting as they entered our reality. Hammond shouted orders to stop Marcus, but it was too late. Security guards rushed toward him, but the nearest architect moved with impossible speed, placing itself between Marcus and the guards. They stopped in their tracks, weapons raised but clearly uncertain about this new threat. Marcus turned to face the room, his eyes finding mine across the distance. "They're not invaders," he called out, his voice carrying clearly over the portal's buzz. "They're refugees from a dying reality, just like I am." The world seemed to stop. I stared at Marcus, trying to process his words. "What is he talking about?" I asked Torres. "Marcus came through 3 years ago during the first successful portal experiment," Torres replied, her voice heavy. "He's one of them, an advanced scout sent to prepare for his people's arrival." I watched as Marcus approached the architect that had protected him. They reached for each other in a gesture of recognition, their hands meeting in a way that seemed both alien and deeply recognizable. "Their dimension is collapsing," Marcus continued, addressing the room but looking directly at me. "They need somewhere to go or they'll be erased from existence. They offered us their technology in exchange for sanctuary." Hammond moved to stand beside Marcus, no longer his captor but his ally. "The knowledge they've shared will advance humanity by centuries," he announced. "This is the beginning of a new era." I turned to Torres, searching her face for answers. "Did you know about Marcus?" She nodded slowly. "I suspected. That's why I gave you the evidence drive. I needed insurance in case his true loyalties were with them, not us." The portal pulsed with energy as more architects emerged. Each moved with that same unsettling grace, their shapes never quite settling into something my eyes could fully resolve. "We need to shut it down," I whispered to Torres, "before more come through." "It's too late," she replied. "But maybe that's not the answer anymore. Look at them. They're not attacking, not forcing their way in." It was true. The architects were interacting with the humans in the room, touching foreheads with willing technicians who seemed to enter a momentary trance before stepping back with expressions of wonder. "They're sharing knowledge," Torres murmured, "memories, experiences." Marcus approached us, stopping a few feet away. His green eyes, which had always seemed to reflect light oddly, now held a recognizable intensity. "I'm sorry for the deception," he said quietly. "But there was no other way." "You're one of them," I said, still struggling to process the revelation. "Yes and no." He glanced back at the others. "I'm a hybrid, part human, part architect. I volunteered to come through first, to learn your world, find allies." "Why me?" I demanded. "Why did you involve me in all this?" "Because you saw patterns where others saw only data. Because you questioned what others accepted." His expression softened. "Because I believed you would understand once you knew the truth." A commotion at the main doors interrupted us. Security monitors showed government forces breaching the facility's outer defenses. Torres's evidence had reached someone with authority. "We don't have much time," Marcus said urgently. "Hammond's methods were wrong, using people as test subjects, hiding the truth. But the architects genuinely need asylum. Their reality is dying." I looked past him to where the entities moved among the humans, each interaction appearing less frightening than the last. "What happens now?" I asked. Before Marcus could answer, the portal pulsed violently, its edges growing unstable. The blue glow intensified, filling the chamber with harsh light. "Something's wrong," Marcus said, turning back toward the control panel. "The portal is destabilizing." Hammond rushed to join him at the controls. "Power fluctuations in the main grid. The government forces must have cut the auxiliary generators." The portal began to contract, its edges flickering dangerously. The architects nearest to it backed away, their shapes rippling with what might have been fear. "If it collapses violently, it could create a cascading temporal event," Torres warned. "The damage would be catastrophic." Marcus worked feverishly at the controls while Hammond shouted orders to his remaining security personnel. I stood frozen, watching as the situation spiraled toward disaster. The architects who had already come through gathered together, their moving shapes seeming to communicate in patterns of light and movement. The portal's buzz changed pitch, becoming a discordant wail that set my teeth on edge. Cracks appeared in the air around it, spreading outward from the frame. "The quantum field is collapsing," a technician shouted over the noise. Marcus looked up from the control panel, looking at me across the chaos. In that moment, I saw both determination and fear, emotions too human to fake, and I realized I faced an impossible choice. The quantum field collapsed around us as fracture lines spread from the portal frame across the air of the chamber. I stood paralyzed between two impossible futures: let the architects through and trust Marcus's claim they meant no harm, or stop them and potentially save humanity from interdimensional invasion. "We need to evacuate now," a technician shouted, abandoning his station as equipment sparked and failed around us. Hammond's eyes were wild with fervor as he stared at the architects already through the portal. "No! We must maintain the connection at all costs." Dr. Torres grabbed my arm. "This is our chance to end it. If the portal destabilizes completely, they won't be able to establish another foothold." The chamber had descended into chaos. Scientists and security personnel pushed toward the exits while the architects moved strangely, seemingly unafraid of the collapsing portal behind them. Their iridescent skin showed patterns I couldn't comprehend. Torres pulled me behind a bank of servers as Hammond barked orders, trying to regain control of his facility and the situation. "I have something that can finish this," she whispered, reaching into her jacket. She produced a small cylindrical device with a simple activation switch. "This will overload the quantum reactor's containment systems. It will collapse not just this portal, but the dimensional thinning across the entire city. They'll never be able to come through again." "That could kill everyone in the building," I said, shocked at the extremity of her solution. "Some prices are necessary." Her eyes were hard, determined. "We can't risk—" A gunshot rang through the chamber. Torres jerked forward, her eyes widening in surprise as a red stain spread across her chest. The detonator tumbled from her hand, and I caught it reflexively. Hammond stood 10 feet away, a pistol raised and still smoking. "I can't allow that, Dr. Torres." Torres slumped against me, her breath coming in wet gasps. "Don't let them through," she whispered, her fingers digging into my arm with surprising strength. "They'll change everything." Then she died, her body heavy and still against mine. My mind was strangely calm, even though horror unfolded around me. The detonator felt heavy in my palm. "Eliza!" Marcus pushed through the chaos, his eyes finding me instantly. When he saw Torres and the device in my hand, he froze. "What are you doing?" "Staying alive, I hope," I said, backing away from him. I didn't know what to believe anymore. His claims of refugee architects, Torres's warnings of invasion, Hammond's fanatical devotion to beings from another dimension. Hammond turned his gun toward me. "Give me the detonator, Ms. Chen." "Don't do this," Marcus pleaded, ignoring Hammond completely, his focus entirely on me. "My people aren't invaders. Our reality is collapsing. I was sent ahead 3 years ago to find a safe haven, to prepare the way." By lying to me? By manipulating the passengers? I kept the detonator clutched tightly, my thumb hovering over the activation switch. "I did what was necessary to survive," Marcus said, his voice strained. "Yes, I used you to get into this facility, but nothing I told you about the danger was a lie. The portals are damaging your reality. What I didn't tell you was that they can be stabilized with the proper technology. Technology my people can provide." Hammond took a step closer, his gun steady. "The architects have shared knowledge beyond our imagining. They've shown me glimpses of what humanity can become with their guidance." There was something wrong with Hammond's eyes, a subtle shimmer that reminded me of the architects' changing bodies. He wasn't just collaborating with them, he'd been fundamentally changed by them. A scream drew my attention to the far side of the chamber. One of the architects had approached a terrified technician who cowered against the wall. I expected violence, some horrific alien attack. Instead, the entity simply placed what might have been a hand against the man's forehead. The technician's fear changed to wonder. After several seconds, the architect moved away, and the man looked after it with clear understanding. All around the chamber, similar scenes were unfolding. The architects were touching humans, not attacking them, but communicating, sharing. "You see," Marcus said softly, "they share knowledge, memories. It's how they connect." "What happened to Hammond?" I asked, noticing again that strange shimmer in the director's eyes. "He received too much," Marcus explained. "Opened himself too fully, too quickly to their consciousness. It changed him." Hammond's gun hadn't moved. "The detonator, Ms. Chen, I won't ask again." Everything depended on my decision. Torres was dead. The portal was destabilizing. If I activated the detonator, I would collapse all portals and cut off Earth from these beings forever, but potentially trigger a catastrophic quantum event in the process. If I handed it over to Hammond, the architects would have unfettered access to our world with unknown consequences. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him. His green eyes reflected the portal's light unnaturally, betraying his true nature. Had I missed what he really was? Or did I somehow know he was different from the start and felt attracted to that? The chamber shook violently as another surge of energy pulsed through the portal. More fracture lines appeared in the air around us. We were running out of time. "There's another way," I said suddenly, an idea forming. "The portals run on predictable mathematical sequences tied to power distribution. If I modify this detonator, I could trigger a controlled feedback loop through the quantum reactor. It would stabilize the current portal but prevent any expansion." "That's not possible," Hammond said, but uncertainty flickered across his face. "It is," Marcus countered. "She's right. A controlled quantum state could establish equilibrium." I had no idea if my theory would work, but as a data analyst, I'd spent years finding patterns where others saw only chaos. The portal system operated on mathematical principles that could be manipulated. Hammond lunged for me, his composure finally breaking. "I can't allow limitations. The gateway must expand." I twisted away, but he caught my arm, wrenching it painfully. The gun pressed against my ribs as we struggled for the detonator. Marcus moved to intervene, but Hammond swung the weapon toward him. That momentary distraction was all I needed. I drove my knee up sharply, connecting with Hammond's midsection. He doubled over, and I broke free, backing away with the detonator still clutched in my hand. Hammond recovered quickly, raising his gun again. Before he could fire, a blinding flash of light erupted from the portal. We all turned to see 3 more architects emerging, these larger than the others, their bodies rippling with complex patterns. They moved directly toward Hammond. "It's too late," he gasped, a mixture of fear and reverence on his face. "They're here." While Hammond was distracted, I quickly examined the detonator. My hands worked with surprising steadiness as I pried open the casing and identified the trigger mechanism. If I rerouted the charge through the regulator instead of the explosive component, it might create the feedback loop I'd theorized. The largest architect reached Hammond, who dropped his gun and extended his hands in welcome. When the entity touched him, Hammond's body went rigid. The shimmer in his eyes intensified until they glowed with the same iridescent patterns that moved beneath the architect's skin. I had seconds, nothing more. My fingers reconfigured the detonator's wiring as Marcus watched in tense silence. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "No," I admitted, "but it feels right." The portal's instability had reached critical levels. Equipment exploded around the chamber as power surges overloaded circuits. The very air seemed to vibrate with potential energy. I closed the detonator's casing and moved toward the quantum reactor's main control panel. If I connected it here, at the nexus of the power distribution system, It should affect the entire portal network. "Stand back," I warned Marcus. He moved away, but his eyes remained fixed on mine. "Whatever happens, thank you for trying to understand." I connected the modified detonator to the control panel and activated it. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then a pulse of blue-white energy surged from the device into the reactor core. The portal's edges, which had been fluctuating wildly, suddenly stabilized. The fracture lines in the air stopped spreading, then slowly began to close. The portal itself remained open, but its diameter ceased expanding. The architects already through seemed to communicate with those still on the other side, patterns of light flowing rapidly across their bodies. A new alarm blared through the facility. "Security breach at main entrance," announced an automated voice. "Unknown forces have entered the building." "Government response team," Marcus said. "Someone must have alerted them." "Torres," I realized. The evidence drive she gave me. She must have set it to transmit automatically if something happened to her. The chamber doors burst open as armed tactical units swarmed in, weapons raised. They hesitated at the sight of the architects, clearly unprepared for the reality of what they were facing. I saw my opportunity in the confusion. The evidence drive Torres had given me was still in my pocket, containing everything the passengers had gathered about North Lake's illegal experiments and Hammond's collaboration with interdimensional entities. While government agents secured the room and started detaining North Lake personnel, I slipped to a still-functioning computer terminal. With trembling fingers, I connected the drive and initiated a mass upload to every news outlet and social media platform in Torres's distribution list. The truth would be out there. No cover-up, no matter how powerful, could contain it once it spread across the internet. "What did you just do?" Marcus asked, appearing beside me. "Insurance," I said, removing the drive. "Whatever happens now, the world will know." Armed agents approached us, weapons raised. "Hands where we can see them," one shouted. I raised my hands slowly, the empty drive still clutched in my palm. "My name is Eliza Chen," I told them, "and I have a lot to explain." 3 months later, I stood in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle, watching as humans and architects worked side by side. The massive space housed the newly formed Interdimensional Research Initiative, a joint scientific team studying controlled portal technology under international oversight. The initial chaos following the North Lake incident had given way to cautious diplomacy. The evidence I'd released had forced governments worldwide to acknowledge the existence of the architects and the dimensional portals. Public reaction had ranged from terror to fascination, but the absence of any hostile action from the interdimensional visitors had gradually eased fears. I walked through the facility toward the main research lab, nodding to colleagues, both human and otherwise. After extensive debriefing by various agencies, I'd been offered a position analyzing the mathematical patterns of stable portal formation. It felt right, using my skills to help understand this new reality rather than fearing it. Marcus was waiting in the lab, deep in conversation with one of the architects. Their communication involved both spoken words and those rippling patterns of light that I was slowly learning to interpret. When he saw me, he excused himself and approached. "The delegation from the UN arrives tomorrow," he said. "They want another demonstration of the energy application." I nodded. "The conversion metrics are promising. If we can harness the quantum field for clean energy production, it could solve the climate crisis within a decade." Marcus had been granted provisional citizenship under the hastily drafted Interdimensional Refugee Protocol. His role as translator between species had proven invaluable during the tense early negotiations. To most of the world, he was a curiosity, the first publicly acknowledged hybrid living among us. To me, he remained a complicated figure, part deceiver, part savior. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Your decision that day?" I considered the question carefully. Sometimes I wonder if Torres was right to be cautious. The world is changing so rapidly now. "All thresholds bring change," he said. "That's their nature." Through the lab's wide windows, I could see the stabilized portal that connected our facility to a similar one on the architect's side. Unlike the violent tear at North Lake, this gateway was carefully regulated, allowing controlled passage and communication between dimensions. Only a small number of architects had been permitted to cross over so far, scientists and diplomats establishing the framework for future relations. The rest remained in their deteriorating reality, waiting while we developed the technology to safely accommodate more refugees. I'd seen their world through the portal. The crystalline structures that had once seemed so alien now felt almost recognizable. Their dimension was beautiful in its strangeness, even as it slowly collapsed around the edges. The quantum stabilizers are holding, I noted, checking the monitors. We've maintained equilibrium for 72 hours straight. A new record, Marcus smiled. The full council will be pleased. The council he referred to was in the newly formed Interdimensional Relations Committee, an international body established to govern human-architect interactions. I served as a technical advisor, translating complex quantum mathematics into terms policymakers could understand. Some days I still woke up expecting to find myself back in my old apartment analyzing traffic patterns for North Lake security. The rapid transformation of my life sometimes felt as unreal as the portals themselves. I received the final reports on Hammond today, I said, changing the subject. The medical team believes the integration with architect consciousness is irreversible. Marcus nodded solemnly. He opened himself too completely, became something neither fully human nor architect. Hammond had been placed in specialized care, his mind operating on principles human psychology couldn't fully comprehend. He spoke in mathematical equations and drew fractal patterns that matched the quantum fluctuations of the portals with uncanny precision. "Do you think that will happen to others?" I asked, "as more of your people come through?" "Not if we proceed carefully," Marcus said. "The integration must be voluntary and measured." Hammond forced the connection, demanded too much knowledge too quickly. I thought about the careful protocols now in place for human architect information exchange, the sharing of memories and knowledge that I'd witnessed in the North Lake facility had been refined into structured educational programs. Humans could learn from architect consciousness without risking their own. Outside the facility, protesters still gathered occasionally. Some feared the visitors. Others wondered if we were moving too cautiously, limiting access to knowledge that could transform human society overnight. The debate raged in government chambers and on social media, but the evidence I'd released had prevented any possibility of returning to secrecy. The portal stabilization technology has applications beyond just energy production, I said, returning to our work. The calculations suggest we could eventually establish connections to other dimensions besides yours. Marcus looked surprised. "You've been extending the mathematical models?" I nodded. "Just theoretical work for now, but the underlying principles are sound. I'd spent nights developing these equations, pushing the boundaries of what we understood about quantum connections between realities. If our dimension and the architects existed, logic suggested there might be countless others, a multiverse of possibilities waiting to be explored. Always looking for the next threshold to cross," Marcus said with a smile that held both admiration and concern. I turned back to the portal, watching its controlled shimmer. "We're standing at the beginning of something, Marcus. Humanity's first steps into a larger reality." The sun was setting outside and darkness was beginning to fill the facility's windows. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, diplomatic negotiations, technological hurdles, and the continuing task of helping two different species understand each other. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of quiet wonder at how far we'd come. 3 months ago, I'd been an analyst noticing strange disappearances in surveillance footage, Now I was helping guide humanity's relationship with beings from another dimension. I thought of Dr. Torres sometimes, wondering if she would approve of the path I'd chosen. She had died trying to protect humanity from what she perceived as a threat. I hoped the careful, regulated approach we'd established would have eventually earned her support. As darkness fell, the portal's blue glow illuminated the lab. Through it, I could see the twin moons of the architect's world rising over crystalline structures. It was beautiful in its alienness, a reminder of how vast and strange reality truly was. I turned from the portal and gathered my research notes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new thresholds to understand and possibly cross. But for now, I was exactly where I needed to be, standing at the crossroads between worlds, helping to build bridges rather than walls. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since I'd watched that woman in the red coat vanish from my surveillance footage, uncertainty no longer felt threatening. It felt like possibility.